Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Asian Vision Dialogue. I'm Sreynou, the host of the program today. Today, the topic of our discussion is about the ASEAN-U.S. Special Summit, which will take place soon. And we have Dr. CHHEANG Vannarith, the president of the Asian Vision Institute, to be our guest in the program today. Greetings, Dr. CHHEANG Vannarith. Dr. Vannarith, the ASEAN-U.S. Special Summit will take place soon. So, could you tell us what will be the issue to be put on the table of discussion?
The United States is one of the key dialogue partners of ASEAN, and under the new administration, President Joe Biden, the U.S. has shown greater interest in engaging ASEAN, and the U.S. has proposed this U.S. ASEAN Special Summit in order to further deepen the partnership between the U.S. and ASEAN, and also to fit into the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. Of course, the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy focuses on alliance systems, but it also gives a significant role to the regional organizations such as ASEAN in order to promote kind of a regional stability and prosperity. And of course, the summit is taking place within the context of U.S.-China rivalry in this region, and China is the first kind of comprehensive strategic partner of ASEAN. So last year, ASEAN-China also have special summit, which is very special because it was the first time President Xi Jinping attended the summit, and we reached a milestone in advancing the partnership and agreed on upgrading the partnership to comprehensive strategic partnership. So China was the first comprehensive strategic partnership of ASEAN, but I'm not sure whether the U.S. also interested in upgrading its partnership with ASEAN toward a comprehensive strategic partnership on the same level with China. But anyway, I think the key issue to be discussed at the upcoming ASEAN-U.S. Special Summit would be first on the COVID-19 socio-economic recovery, and within the context of Omicron, for instance, and how we can work together to contain and also to open the economy safely, and to further connect this kind of economic cooperation between the U.S. and ASEAN, because the U.S. under Donald Trump, the previous administration, pursued protectionist policy, which which disconnect to some extent the U.S. from the regional integration. And this year, within the framework of regional comprehensive economic partnership, and the U.S. is outside the TPP, for instance. So somehow the U.S. feels that it is not much integrated in these regions. So I don't know what will be the key message from the U.S. with regard to trade and investment cooperation with ASEAN, because the U.S. want to be part of this economic engine, economic dynamics in the region. Of course, it comes to political security issue. I think Myanmar would be top on the agenda, and then South China Sea, and perhaps to some extent the cross-strait tension between mainland China and Taiwan, the cross-strait tensions, to some extent perhaps the East China Sea and other regional issues and even global issues. I'm not sure whether the U.S. will also discuss about Ukraine, what's going on there between the U.S., NATO, and Russia with regards to Ukraine. So those are perhaps another key issues. And Joe Biden also interested in climate change. So I think he will push climate change agenda and to strengthen U.S. partnership to address climate change.
Dr. Vannarith, as the Myanmar situation continues to be a concern, so would you mind sharing us the perspective with regard to the role of U.S. as a superpower and also the ASEAN dialogue partner in dealing with the Myanmar crisis?
Of course, the U.S. is the superpower as a member of UN Security Council and remain the most influential global actor. So the U.S. approach to what Myanmar really critical, and ASEAN need to work with all dialogue partners, including the United States, in order to find common ground in approaching Myanmar. Of course, the U.S. has been the most critical of the coup took place February last year, and following violence and the arrest of political activists and so on. So this is the critical time for ASEAN to explain the U.S. about the ASEAN way in dealing with Myanmar, because ASEAN way in dealing with Myanmar is different from the U.S. way in dealing with Myanmar, because we are more patient, we are more understanding, and we are more keen on applying quiet diplomacy sometimes in order to engage Myanmar effectively. Of course, pressure works, but pressure alone does not solve the problem. We need to combine pressure with other measures that can convince different actors in Myanmar to come to the negotiation table, to come to the dialogue. So I think the U.S. may need to work with ASEAN and find a common ground, not too tough and not so soft, right? So somewhere in between, because ASEAN understand the political culture characteristics of Myanmar, because it's kind of the ASEAN way of understanding the Myanmar issues. And of course, the U.S. need to support the ASEAN engagement on Myanmar, the role of the ASEAN Special Envoy. We need the endorsement and support from the U.S. With regards to this, and humanitarian assistance. So the U.S., of course, they have different agencies under the U.S. government, so may need to work with ASEAN to provide humanitarian assistance to Myanmar. And the U.S. should refrain from making any statements that may send a signal to different stakeholders in Myanmar that the U.S. takes side with different particular group. And the U.S. and other major power such as China and Russia perhaps need to work closely together on the Myanmar issue, especially to impose, let's say, arms embargo, not to sell weapons to different groups, fighting groups, and to coordinate humanitarian assistance to Myanmar.
Recently, Prime Minister Hun Sen has received the invitation letter from the President Joe Biden with regard to the ASEAN-U.S. Special Summit. By seeing this, could you tell us the analysis with regard to the ASEAN-U.S. relationship and Cambodia-U.S. relationship, whether it is improved or any particular change in this regard?
Yeah, more than 1 year now, after Joe Biden came to power, we have seen the significant, kind of remarkable progress in terms of engagement between the U.S. and ASEAN. So I think down the road, let's say the next 3 years under Joe Biden administration, we could foresee that the U.S.-ASEAN partnership will continuously strengthen. But of course, from ASEAN perspective, we wish to see more economic role of the United States in this region, not only security and geostrategic kind of objective or interest, but also economic engagements, because most of ASEAN member states prioritize economic interests. And economic security is national security. So that is something that the U.S. need to further demonstrate its leadership role in promoting economic integrations by being part of regional trading arrangement and liberalization, facilitation, and so on. Of course, this is very politically sensitive issue because of the domestic politics in the U.S. and put a constraint on U.S. Economic diplomacy and economic engagement with ASEAN and with other regions. So that is something that the U.S. need to further enhance its economic engagement and economic role in the Asia Pacific and with ASEAN. Bilateral relations, U.S., Cambodia, were up and downs. It's fluctuated over the time. Some may call it a love and hate relationship. But the general trend is quite stable relationship, and I could foresee in the next few years it remain to be stable, and of course there are some tension here and there, but the general picture will be stable, and more elements will be integrated or strengthened in this bilateral relation is people-to-people relationship and economic relationship. And Prime Minister Hun Sen, as a co-chair of World Summit in Seoul, Republic of Korea, lately he met with Republican leaders, Mike Pence, former Vice President Mike Pence, former Foreign Minister Mike Pompeo, and former Defense Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. So those are kind of personal rapport and personal ties have been built, at least to get to know each other, to understand each other's perspective, and that is also important because we never know after 3 years in the next election whether the Democrats will continue or Republicans will win the election. So that is something we don't know. But I think Cambodia open and are willing to further promote cooperation with the United States, but based on independence and several equality, equal sovereignty, non-interference, for instance. So those are the basic norms and principles of Cambodian foreign policy that the U.S. should not and must not interfere into Cambodian domestic politics.
Dr. Vander, last question. Could you elaborate more on the future trends of U.S. Mekong and U.S. ASEAN with regard to the cooperation and collaboration? Yeah.
From the Mekong country perspective, the U.S. is one of the key development partners and wish to see the U.S. to engage in practical cooperation area of practical cooperation, especially when it comes to non-traditional security issue or human security issues such as climate change, water security, infrastructure development, trade, investment, and so on, human resource development. Those are the practical areas that we wish the U.S. to engage in the Mekong. At the ASEAN level, I think the message that we keep sending to the U.S. is to use the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific as a principle, as a guidance, and as a platform for practical cooperation. Because ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific is the linchpin or is a platform to connect all the dots to some extent, to build synergies, complementarities among different competitive initiatives, such as the Belt and Road Initiative with the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Initiative, which have different versions of Free and Open Indo-Pacific, from Japanese to US, Australian, India, and some country in Europe, and EU itself has its own version of Indo-Pacific. So the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific can be a linchpin, can be a platform to connect all these dots together. so that we can maintain peace and stability and progress in these regions. So the trend of the U.S.-ASEAN partnership is not only depends on the U.S. design, geopolitical design, but also depends on how and what ASEAN wants the U.S. To engage in these regions. As I said earlier, our priority is economic cooperation, economic security, practical cooperations. We don't want to see our securitization or our politicization of different initiatives, because we don't want to be sandwiched by this kind of political competition narrative, power game, and so on, right? What we want is do something for the people, practical cooperation that can benefit the people, right? So that is the message, and I think that the U.S. would take the ASEAN way, ASEAN approach seriously, and try to design its engagement strategy in this region based on consultation and consensus. Because ASEAN rejects hegemonic behavior of any superpower. So we want to be on equal footing, equal partnership, and complement to each other.
Our Asian Vision Dialogue has now come to an end. We would like to thank you again, Dr. Vannarith, for your kind, insightful contribution and participation in our today program. Thank you for being with us, and see you again in the next episode.